It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome! Hey, everybody, welcome in. My name is Chris. This is a thing that I will continue to make for your ear holes, you tapeworms, you yacht clubbers. Thank you for being here today. Please hang in there. It's pretty miserable. Hopefully we will all get shots in our arms real soon, and we'll have a big party. Until then, please keep wearing a mask. I am recording this show on the Wednesday after the Super Bowl, so let's face it, you've probably gotten a pretty nice sized fill of Super Bowl analysis if you wanted it. But we talked on the podcast all last week and frankly the last 6 weeks about the NFL playoffs, so yeah, it's probably appropriate that we close it out here with some thoughts on what happened in the big game. I did have the Buccaneers and the points in that game. I won some Brady covers and I won some Gronk covers, the overs for both of those. I lost the overs for the overall game, however. Certainly you could have made a nice sum if you had bet on the Chiefs never once finding the end zone. I did not do that. There's Brady stuff to get to for sure, because he's truly undefeated in continuing to make some people flat out lose their damn minds. But I have rewatched the game, and you surely can point out stuff that hurt the Chiefs that you wouldn't normally expect to happen. A crusher of a third down drop by Travis Kelce into the second quarter. A Tyreek Hill drop near the end, I think, of the first quarter. That impossible horizontal throw that Mahomes made that hit Damian Williams in the face and he dropped. And then also the officiating in the first half, legitimately a couple times, really not very good. It should not have been a holding call away from the play on that Brady interception. Letter of the law, is Mike Evans getting held beyond 5 yards? Even that's debatable, but okay, maybe letter of the law, but come on, it's away from the play. You're letting that go all season long. And then the interference in the end zone in the second quarter was uncatchable. Probably wasn't interference anyway, but I don't know. Pretty much everything else looked like a penalty to me, and it's a 31-9 game. I just don't find it compelling that the officiating is responsible for a blowout that was basically, completely not a game for most of the second half. We surely saw the impact of the Chiefs' tackles being hurt, and I think we also saw some stubbornness that a lot of people have talked about on the part of the Chiefs coaches offensively. They just assumed that Mahomes could do what he always does, even under pressure, because he gets pressure, right? It's not the best offensive line ever. It's usually better than that. Usually he runs around and he makes enough plays, so they never really helped the 5 offensive linemen who were having a bad game. I know there's a temptation this recent to the event to call Tampa's defense some kind of world historic unit, and I guess we'll see what happens next year. Maybe they will prove that that's true. And if you listened through the January podcasts that we did, I, on this show, kept saying this is probably the only good defense left in the playoffs. Some very good players. But I think we should probably save the exaggeration. I remember Taylor Heineke moving the ball against them in the wild card round, where it took a pretty great effort from Tom Brady to eke out a win. A strategic error in hindsight not to adjust for what turned out to be disastrous blocking by the Chiefs' offensive line, and also a great adjustment from the Buccaneers to not do what they do and just blitz with abandon. I think this was the Belichick game plan against the Chiefs. It's the blueprint that they've been following for a few years now. They kept a game without Cam Newton close against the Chiefs with this game plan just this past season. It's theoretically the reason why the Patriots have kept drafting these tweener athlete types like Kyle Duggar, who, I guess, Josh Uche. I mean, he played at Michigan, really? Signing Adrian Phillips, like that's what they're looking for. All these tweener guys who can flood a zone and cover a bunch of guys. It's designed for the type of QB like Mahomes, where if you blitz, you're just gonna get killed. We know the story. It's the old thing. We've been talking about it for years. Getting pressure with 4. Not a lot of teams can do it. No question. Shaq Barrett, JPP, Ndamukong Suh, Vita Vea, they did it. They're really good, and the Chiefs' offensive line was really bad. It's hard to argue the better team didn't win. With those tackles, with Remmers and Wiley, could the Chiefs have made it closer? Could they have stayed in it if they'd run more? If they'd run more screens? If they'd tried to go get smaller chunks, tried to hang on to the ball. Not really their MO. Could they have? Basically with the Tampa game plan in this game, maybe not. We'll never know. But what they tried didn't work at all, and for that, they do deserve some blame. And on the other side of the ball, in the first half when it was still tense, Brady was very good. His longer of the two throws to Gronk, the second one, was a beautiful ball. The deep cross to Evans was wide open, but it was perfect in-stride throw. The Antonio Brown touchdown, we're now told that Brown ran the wrong route. He was supposed to run in, then out, the arrow route. Instead, he ran out and then in, and Brady adjusted on the fly and hit him. In the first half, Brady was, I think, 16 for 19, 140 yards, 3 touchdowns? Should have had an interception too, but still pretty good. And the people who Brady makes insane still want to tell you he's nothing special. 20 quarterbacks could have done that. Well, no, they couldn't. That's why most of them can't keep NFL jobs, let alone get to the playoffs. But if you're arguing that the way this game wound up not demanding that much of the winning team's quarterback in a blowout, I agree. This particular game, if the other team can only score 9 points, yeah, probably a lot of QBs out there who can get you 10. But that doesn't mean Brady's overrated, and I don't know. We're going to stop this part of the conversation real quick, because if your mindset is still that this guy's lucky and not the best, nothing I'm going to say is going to convince you. You are a proud member of TAnon, and you should probably just go do your posts. It may make you insane. You may not like him at all, but you're just being a football moron, which is your right. You can be a football moron if you want to. Brady was awesome this year. To argue that he's not the difference between 2019 and 2020 is quite the hill to die on. My stupid team shouldn't have let him walk out the door. Dude threw for 4,600 yards and 40 touchdowns, and at several points this season put the team on his back. In this specific game, the fact that Leonard Fournette got going.
I say Leonard Fournette. Maybe he's not too fast.
Ow. That was important. And the fact that Ronald Jones got going, also important. And then they just didn't need too much more than that. And you really can't blame any of them for not producing more numbers because they just didn't need them. And we don't blame Mahomes. If this is the first game you ever saw Patrick Mahomes play, you might say, all right, what's the big deal with that guy? But he's obviously got more goodwill and impossible plays banked away than he could ever squander in 10 Super Bowls. But pretty much everyone else was dog food. Kelsey's drop was a big part of the game getting out of control. Hill did have the game's first touchdown in his hands, and it was a crazy throw by Mahomes. It was right there, and he dropped it. Damian Williams, my God. Oh, my God. That drop was unbelievable. And, even the Cajun lawyer.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a Cajun, a pretty good lawyer, too.
Absolutely. I agree with that. He had put up a few numbers, but didn't really get relied on when they needed it, and I don't know, just didn't look like he was all that special. And the fact that they didn't change the plan midstream and try to roll with him, say maybe late first half or early second half, tells you something. Anyway, that's it. Brady defies the passage of time, wins more titles than frickin' Michael Jordan, ho-hum. The footy pajama wearer in me should probably feel mixed about it. My stupid team let that guy go.
Today's kickoff.
On today's show, that's pretty much going to do it for the 2020 season, I guess. So it's time to start looking forward to 2021. And therefore, this is going to be the first show where we start talking about the 2021 fantasy season. We don't really know that much yet, of course, about what players are going to change teams and what free agents are going to land where and who's going to draft whom. So there's lots more we don't know than we do know, but we also have assessments of players that we've built up over the course of last season. And a fun show that we do this time every year is 5 level jumping players. And to that end, my guest is going to be Matt Harmon from Yahoo Fantasy. And Matt and I are going to count down our top 5 potential level jumping players for 2021. I don't know who is on Matt's list. I just figured out mine. You've heard some of these names before from me, but I tried to come up with a couple of new ones as well. I think you'll have fun. I certainly hope so. And I really do thank you for continuing to listen to this show. I'm always happy when Brooklinen sponsors because they've been a great sponsor all season, and because everything I've ever gotten from Brooklinen, legitimately like the best version of that thing. I have towels from Brooklinen, almost unbelievably plush. I have sheets and pillowcases from Brooklinen. They feel like luxury, but without a steep price. I have a duvet cover from Brooklinen. Absolutely love it. And now Brooklinen is also selling comforters. If you're in the market for a new comforter, check them out. They come in lightweight, all season, and ultra warm. One thing that's very nice is that they offer a variety of materials in their comforters, including an eco-friendly down alternative. I sleep with a down alternative duvet, and I absolutely love it. Listen, there is a reason why Brooklinen has over 75,000 five-star reviews. They only rep really good stuff, and they're also completely online, so you are cutting out the retail middleman. Treat yourself to ultimate comfort with Brooklinen's Comforter Collection. Go to brooklinen.com and use the promo code HarrisFootball to get $25 off with a minimum purchase of $100. That's BROOKLINEN.com and enter the promo code HarrisFootball for $25 off with a minimum purchase of $100. Brooklinen.com, promo code HarrisFootball.
Today's guest.
Suddenly, I said today again, oh woe is me. A possum shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday.
And it's today. It's Matt Harmon. That's how I know it's today. I would like for you to follow Mr. Harmon on Twitter at Matt Harmon. Matt, what is? I already just forgot it. What is your Twitter handle? Sorry, BYD.
Yikes! I remember like 5 minutes ago before we started, you were just bragging about what a pro you are at this whole podcasting thing, and here you are. You forget it's at Matt Harmon _BYB. It's really my fault for having the underscore BYB still tattooed like on me as if it's like an X's name or something. But so I'll give you a break on this one, Chris.
Yeah, Matt Harmon _BYB. I just didn't remember whether it was Matt _Harmon _BYB. I couldn't remember how many. We can only have like so many underscores in a Twitter handle. Jim McCormick will come beat down your door. He's known. He's the underscore Baron. We were just talking about a bunch of things before we started recording. Probably people would really like to hear that conversation, but we're not going to make it public. But one thing we were talking about is that something that I love that you do every year, reception perception, is coming, and I'm excited. I know the details are it's going to be a change in delivery this time around, but it's going to be awesome. There's going to be a lot of stuff to promote it, and reception perception is Matt's player-by-player, play-by-play assessment of every freaking wide receiver we need to know about. It's so incredibly invaluable that if you're a fantasy player not taking advantage of reception perception, I just think you're flat out going to be behind the curve any season you don't look at it. So we don't know exactly, we can't tell you exactly how it's going to be delivered just yet, but
yes,
if anything I say sounds interesting to you, find him on Twitter. I've just learned Matt Harmon _BYB.
Yeah, since you've had me muted for the last 5 years, I think that no, yeah, people can, if they want to get an early taste, hashtag reception perception. But yeah, announcement forthcoming. And I do think it's always funny when people, like you said, I think I'm profiling pretty much every wide receiver that matters. And if I'm not profiling that wide receiver, that's probably not a good thing, right? Like I've had a couple people, there's been a few people in the early part of the offseason. It's like, all right, when are you going to get to this guy? When are you going to get to this guy? Like a few folks that are hitting me up about, well, so what do you think? Where are we at with N'Keal Harry? Like, when are you going to chart him? And I'm like, he's pretty far down the priority list.
Yeah, that's
usually like not a good sign.
Indeed. So there's that. And then there's this, because obviously Matt has been coming on this show nearly as long as there's been this show. And it seems like I just gravitate to you for this particular episode. This is your third straight year doing this show of level jumpers for the next season. And I looked back on our lists from last year, and we were terrible. I don't know if there's anyone good on our lists. Not a single person. I had TJ Hawkinson.
He's pretty good.
Yeah, not that good. Not good enough, really. I mean, he's okay. The tight end you had was Dawson Knox, so I'll take the TJ Hawkinson love. 2 years ago you were on, though. We both had Calvin Ridley. That worked out pretty well. I had Kenny Golladay as my 1. However, I negligated that out with Dante Pettis at number 2. So let's just call that even. But the bottom line of this list that now Matt is committed to doing every year until he dies is we don't know situations, right? This is kind of the first show we're talking where everything's over for 2020 and free agency's coming and the draft's coming, and we just don't know. And so largely we're going to base this conversation on what we thought of ability and maybe diminished opportunity. And we can see a world where, because we thought the glimpses of what we saw were pretty good, we could imagine somebody being considered at a different level than they were the previous season, and not in the negative direction, in the positive. Does that make sense, Matt?
Totally makes sense. I think everyone got it clearly.
All right. Well, then I just said 1,000 words when 10 would have sufficed. These are our level jumpers for 2021. We're going to do another pointless countdown, 5 through 1. Who knows what that means? But I'm going to make you do it. So who's your number 5 level jumper for 2021?
My number 5 is Michael Pittman, Colts wide receiver. Talk about a situation that we shouldn't talk about, which is that we have no idea who's going to be playing Colts or a quarterback for the Colts in 2021. But really liked Pittman a lot coming out of school. Sort of got on a slow burn last year because he had injuries early on, but flashed a lot of potential and in ways that I didn't necessarily think he was going to flash a lot of potential. You know, I thought that Pittman would be sort of a weird fit with the current version of Phillip Rivers, because Pittman, to me, profiles along that Allen Robinson, Kenny Golladay axis, where when they hit the league, I figured for Pittman, he'd be similar to those two guys, where a perimeter receiver that wins in the downfield contested area and then starts to work on the nuances of his route running to become more of a full field player. I think Robinson has reached the peak of that axis. I think Golladay has, up until last year when he ran into injury troubles, had gotten better every single year, to the point that I thought in 2020 he was ready to fully be that number 1 true wide receiver, and maybe for a different team next year he can be that guy. And then so I thought Pittman was going to follow that similar path, but rather than that, he actually was most impressive in like the yards after catch game, those crossing routes that Phillip Rivers used to throw a lot to a guy like Tyrell Williams back with the San Diego Chargers. So yeah, I think Pittman's a guy that's on an upward trajectory that I really like. Again, a lot remains to be seen what the offense is going to look like in Indianapolis, but definitely a player that I think is on the fringes of this 2020 wide receiver class that was just loaded with all of these rock stars. And I'm probably not done, teaser, talking about 2020 wide receivers, but I think Pittman's sort of on the fringes of that conversation. That's probably still a guy that, you know, in dynasty leagues is not going to be as sought after as some of the higher names.
Yeah, I have a couple of those guys on my list as well, but Pittman's not one of them. I agree with you that every time it seems to me, and I have to go, I'm going to, for almanac purposes, I'm going to be watching everybody all over again. But I did some film work during the season on Pittman, and it seemed to me that when he had off coverage, when he got a free release, when it wasn't about technique to get himself streaking, usually, like you said, on a crossing route or somehow like a little stabbing in-cutting route where he could be on the move as he caught the ball, that was when he was effective. But anytime anybody devoted to any kind of press coverage to him, it was like he was kind of lost. I wonder if that coincides with what you saw.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was, like I said, that was more something I expected him to be better at coming into the NFL. But again, he's a guy that, like, we have to remember, got off to a slower start because of that injury. So maybe just didn't have the time to hone that technique, but was certainly being used in more creative ways. And I almost think like it's a good thing to see him flash in a way that I wasn't expecting as a rookie, because I liked him so much at USC, and I think he was a really good get off the line type of wide receiver, very good at getting off physical press coverage to win downfield as a collegiate player. So I'm like, all right, if that tool is still in his toolbox and he can add it to, the crossing patterns and some of that middle of the field work, the free releases, like you said, if he can make a lot of plays in that regard as a second-year player and going forward into his career, then maybe we're really working with something. It was a surprising rookie season from him, given, like I said, how we expected him to be used and how he was actually deployed.
Okay, my 5, I will say Jalen Hurts for some of the reasons implied by your not knowing what's going to happen in Indianapolis, because certainly Carson Wentz, as of our recording this, we don't know his landing spot, but there's some logic that says maybe the Colts are a spot for him since Frank Reich is there. Either way, it feels to me like Hurts is destined to be the dude there. They're going to get rid of him. That bridge feels burned, but who knows? I mean, you could have a happy reunion and everybody's happy, and who knows? But at the moment,
now, 3 days ago, they were singing songs about how they were getting so many offers, and we're looking at like a Matthew Stafford type package, and then 3 days later, nothing's come of that. So I agree with you. I do expect Wentz to move on and Hurts to be the guy there. But yeah, it's just. It's going to be like, it seems more than ever we've got like trickle out of information from different sides, and I think maybe we're just smarter consumers of football, but as soon as I read those reports, it was like, all right, the Eagles are leaking these, which means the Eagles want to get rid of Wentz.
Right. So Hurts, wasn't really supposed to be one of those running guys. I mean, I guess he was. He's like a 4.6 guy. It's not Kyler Murray. Heaven knows he's not a 4.3 guy. He's a 4.6 guy, but I'll say it. In this fantasy world where it doesn't really matter if you can throw, if as long as you run for 800 yards and 8 touchdowns, Hurts has a chance. I mean, Eagles could be a mess. Eagles could have a lot of rebuilding to do. We know they're in cap jail. There's a lot of problems there. But just if you're going to talk about going from a level of not really even being a consideration to like, okay, you want me to take my quarterback in the 8th round? I'll just take Jalen Hurts. Like, I have no idea if that's going to wind up being where he goes. But again, because fantasy's sort of broken with the running quarterbacks, I wasn't wildly impressed with Hurts as a thrower. But then again, I'm making excuses for Wentz as a thrower because everyone was hurt and because they had no offensive line. So I'm not going to get mad at Hurts. So maybe he's a fine thrower. I don't know. But if he runs, good for me.
Yeah, I liked what I saw out of Hurts from just like a poise perspective, because it was so clear, I think, to anybody watching last year, unless you were really just a diehard, I'm going to just put the rose-colored glasses on guy for Wentz. It was clear, I think, that he was adding to the problems in Philadelphia last year, but and then then Hurts gets dropped into that situation, and it was just much more life to the offense. I was impressed by that. I've always sort of liked Jalen Hurts from his college days, and he did have a good rushing background in college, so he might not be the athlete that a Kyler Murray is, but he certainly has that gamer mentality to him where he will take off, and that was a pretty quick instinct for him as a rookie. I think you made a very good pick there that I wish I had thought of.
All right, how about number 4 on your list?
Yeah, number 4 on my list is actually a guy that was on your list 2 years ago, funny enough, and has clearly never taken that jump, but it's O.J. Howard. And I know this is a weird one, right? Like sort of out of left field because he's been so far out of our view for a long time. But look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like Gronk is going to fall off, because the guy looked like his usual self in the Super Bowl just a week ago, which was crazy. I mean, maybe not peak Gronk, but he certainly doesn't look like he's lost that much. So I'm not saying that, Gronk is going to retire. Gronk seems like he's going to come back, but Howard got injured early in the year, but at the same time, they were using him a decent amount. I think they still have plans for him, and I thought he was looking like the best version of himself early in the year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At a position like tight end, I'm always going to sort of keep the candle lit for these guys, especially these big-time athletes that flashed ability, but maybe even as they start to lose some athleticism after an injury, they can sort of add the rest of the nuances to their game. Like O.J. Howard's a guy that I think could take the leap from, completely off the radar at this point to back in tight end consideration because of the offense that he's playing in. Though so many of these coaches with Tampa Bay, and I know I'm coming off like the talent thing here and talking about, the minutia, Chris, so I'm sorry about this, but there were so many coaches that I think Clyde Christensen in particular, the quarterback coach there, was like, man, I wish we had 8 more weeks with this Buccaneers team that was playing last year, because we really felt like we were just starting to play our best football as the season ended. And I normally that's just coaching BS, but I kind of agree with them. Like, they had just started to find themselves. I'm really interested in what this offense is going to look like next year, because they have some receiver questions in free agency with Godwin and Antonio Brown. Like, I could see O.J. Howard playing a bigger role than we expect for the next year's Buccaneers. Yeah,
and I'll just mention, like, he had his option picked up, right? So there was a question. The team had to decide to pick up his option, his 5th-year option, preseason before he tore the Achilles, and they did. So he is on the hook for one more year, and Cameron Brate is on the hook for a lot of money. So unless he renegotiates, that could be over as well. So there is actually a chance there. I'm going to take a player who, which list was he on for you? I think he was on last year's list for you. So we're just stealing from each other. But I have Tony Pollard on my list. And I'm not going to talk for too long about him. I'm going to let you talk about him because people, if you've been listening to the show, or if you haven't been from December, go back. There's an episode that Brett Coleman and I did where we talked about just players whose film we liked, regardless of anything else. We just liked their film. And Pollard made my list there. So people have heard me talk about that I think Pollard looked a lot better than I ever thought he would as a running back. It's not about numbers. It's not about yards per carry. It's not about stats. It's just there felt like more oomph on the end of Tony Pollard runs than on Zeke Elliott runs. But I wonder if you agree.
I do agree, and that's why I had him on my list last year, because I thought he had some of that explosive ability. He actually didn't even look that great from just a raw stats perspective. I know you could dig into some of the advanced metrics from his rookie year and be like, oh, yeah, this sort of elusive rating or whatever you want to talk about. But from a raw stats perspective, he looked like just a fine back. But I think when you watch him, there's just more impressive ability there. And I totally agree with you. Zeke wasn't a fantasy bust or anything like that, especially when Dak was playing, but definitely when Pollard got dropped in there, I think you said it perfectly, just more oomph, just more juice on those runs when Pollard was back there. I do agree with you. And I think that he's going to be a guy that maybe I don't draft Tony Pollard, but I might let Tony Pollard keep me from drafting Zeke, if that makes sense.
A quick break to ask you this question. If you like wine, do you sometimes find yourself getting in a rut when it comes to wine? I used to, for sure. I knew a couple of things I liked, and I pretty much just stuck to those things. And I think you know what I'm going to say. This is why I'm happy that I'm a member at First Leaf. They make sure that trying a new wine always pays off. It's like being a VIP in the world of wine. I discover top-rated wine I really turn out liking at an exclusive discounted cost with very little effort. First Leaf is a wine club. It sends you personalized selections of wine from top vineyards around the world right to your door. Every bottle hand-picked by experts with your exact preferences and palate in mind. No more guesswork, no more letdowns. And you'll get incredible wine at much lower prices. First Leaf saves you up to 60% off retail on award-winning wine. And unlike other wine clubs, First Leaf uses an algorithm and your feedback to curate future wine recommendations, which means shipments only get better. I can definitely attest to that. Discover new wine like a VIP by becoming a First Leaf member. Join today. You'll get 6 bottles of wine for just $29.95 and free shipping. Just go to tryfirstleaf.com/Harris. That's 6 bottles of wine for $29.95 and free shipping at tryfirstleaf.com/Harris. Okay, we're back with Matt Harmon, and we are counting down 5 level jumpers for 2021. We're up to your number 3, Matt. Who do you got?
My number 3 is not Anthony Miller from last year. My God, that was my number 2 player. Tough scene. My number 3 player is actually a guy that you had on your list last year. So I actually questioned to myself if this was an appropriate level jumping player. And I was like, this seems too obvious and too dumb. But then I saw you had him number 1 on your list last year. And since he didn't play very much last year, I was like, all right, I feel pretty good about this. But it's Courtland Sutton, a guy that I feel like is going a little bit forgotten about, because we're all talking about Jerry Jeudy, and oh my God, have you seen Jerry Jeudy's drop rate? And KJ Hamler is a guy that flashed with speed and everything. I feel like Courtland Sutton's about to come back to this offense and just be the figurehead there, because Jeudy, I don't tend to get overwhelmed about drop numbers. I feel like anybody that's followed my work for a long time knows where I stand on overemphasizing drops with wide receivers and everything like that. Got a lot of thoughts there, and I think Jeudy could be a really good route running pro. I think he does flash that ability for sure, gets open very easily. I do like KJ Hamler. Noah Fant there too. They've got Melvin Gordon in the backfield. But man, I think Sutton showed so much in his second season, so much growth and development. I talked a little bit about Kenny Golladay earlier. another guy that, like you said, was on your list several years ago. He's a player that took, like I said, took that step from just a deep threat, just a vertical guy in the contested area. And then in his 2019 season looked much more like a true number one receiver. And I think was going to take that next step in 2020 had he not been hurt. I feel like Courtland Sutton got robbed of the chance to go from a flashy downfield guy that took that first step into being a good starting outside receiver to let's see if he takes that next step into being a more of a true number one outside receiver. And now I think Courtland Sutton could take that next step just a year delayed.
So he's my number one because he was my number one last year. So we have someone in common, and of course it did feel just by putting him number one as a little bit of a cheat, but I obviously didn't know who you were going to pick for your list. I've been in the tank. I'm like a big Courtland Sutton. I feel like he kind of is Kenny Golladay. I feel like he is that downfield, not really that much of a burner, but just a lot taller and longer armed than a lot of the players he plays against, and just one of these guys as an athlete who has body control that we can't relate to, just an alien, like a Matrix-style body control guy where he can be falling in the wrong direction with one hand pinned underneath him, and yet somehow he's going to twist his body and reach up and get the ball with one hand and somehow drag it in. And I mean, Galladay's a more accomplished player than Sutton is, obviously. They both just lost a full year to injury, obviously. I'm not going to put Galladay on this list because he's no secret anymore. I think Sutton is going to go underappreciated. A lot depends on what the Broncos do at quarterback. Is it going to be Drew Lock again? There's a lot of feeling now that maybe they've seen enough, and frankly, I think they should have seen enough. But it's some great weaponry, and we can argue, like, I would much prefer that weaponry with Carson Wentz, even though Wentz has terrible floor. We've also seen great ceiling if he ever got his act together, and it turns out it was all related to offensive line problems and the snowball starting rolling downhill. Like, I would just give me a pro that I don't think Drew Lock is in that offense, and Sutton could go boom.
I agree with you. And Sutton's actually one of these guys that it's very rare when I look at reception perception for players to take big leaps, even when they're in year 1 to year 2, but Sutton is one of those guys that took about a 10 percentage point jump in whether you want to look at success rate versus man coverage or success rate versus press coverage from his rookie season to his second season. That was a huge sign for me. Galladay, just a really good comparison to him as a player. He didn't take that sort of jump, but he was a guy that steadily improved in those metrics, like bit by bit for the first 3 years of his career. And I feel like, again, like I said, Sutton's on the precipice of taking that next jump. I think he's the most – it's a good-looking cast of characters there in Denver, as you said, around a bad quarterback in Drew Lock. I don't have much hope for Drew Lock either, but I think Sutton has a chance to be the best pro out of all of those guys.
Okay, so I am talking a bunch more receivers here. My top 3 were all receivers, so I'll go to my number 3, who was, and we talked about how we were going to emphasize the class of 2020. I'm going to put Chase Claypool at 3. Was he on your list by any stretch?
He's my number 1.
All right, well, so there you go. We didn't mean to, but we overlapped in a major way. The funny thing is, what did he have? 808 or 908? I don't remember exactly what I should have. If I had a podcast, I would have looked up his numbers. But if I were a pro, like we talked about off the top, as I'm vamping right now, he had 873 and 9. But it was a pretty hollow feeling, 873 and 9, given that 7 of the 9 happened in the first half of the season, and he did until the the meaningless game against the Browns, or meaningless for the Browns anyway. The meaningless for he was catching passes not from Ben Roethlisberger in week 17. He didn't top something like 60 yards receiving for 2+ months in a row. I just think so I'm stealing this from Brett Coleman, who, when we did that players whose film we like, Claypool was on his list, and that was one of those where I had the same reaction that you had for Hurts, where I was like, oh, I should have put him on there. Because I for sure have questions about the Steelers, of course. I can't really judge the situation yet. We're not 100% sure who the quarterback is. I think it's probably still Big Ben. They have done. I don't think Juju's going to be there, but Deontay Johnson's a really good player. And I don't even know who I prefer between Claypool and Deontay Johnson. They do different things really, really super well. And if you were going to use this season as the bar by which to measure, you'd go, oh, well, Roethlisberger sure liked to throw to Johnson an awful lot. Johnson dropped it a lot, but they're just that was a force feed type situation when Johnson was healthy. And Claypool, as the season went along, felt like got more and more marginalized. But watching his big plays, you just go, I mean, they're calling him Mapletron for a reason. You just go, there are times when it's the DK Metcalf show. There are times when, good luck. If, there's a, I can't remember who it is against. There's a play where he's ISO on the right. It's from the first half of the season. I just rewatched some film for this, even though I couldn't look up his damn numbers. And it's just a foot race. It's just a sprint. It's a pure go. There's nothing else. It's a route that doesn't actually, game? Maybe it's a route that actually doesn't get thrown to that much in the NFL. He had like a step and a half. It's like, there's something there that I grant you. Deontay Johnson's a problem if you're a Claypool fan. I grant you Roethlisberger's a problem if you're a Claypool fan. But there's something there that goes beyond, oh, he's Ted Ginn. I don't think he's that kind of player.
Well, I really want Chase Claypool to be a thing for one reason, which is that we can never forget that people wanted him to move to tight end in the NFL.
Right.
Wow. Tough scene. It's like, did you even? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to rip on anybody, but it's like it did not look like a player. He even at Notre Dame, he didn't look like a player that, like, my first thought is, let's move this guy to tight end, because he has those release chops on the line of scrimmage. I know I saw, some Vincent Jackson comparisons to him coming out of college. If you were going to use him outside, I think that sort of makes sense, right? As a down the field streaker, guy to get off press and throw to vertical down the field. But I actually think it's interesting that you brought up DK Metcalf, because that was sort of a comparison that I was going to make in my mind. I have not put Claypool through reception perception yet, so I'm not going to say he is DK Metcalf or anything like that. But that could actually be an interesting thing to bring up, because I was in on both Metcalf and Lockett last year, because I was like, these guys are both number one receivers. Metcalf is that good. Lockett is that good. I'm drafting both of these guys when I can, because I believe that both of them are that type of talent. And the way those guys actually succeed on the field, I think Johnson and Tyler Lockett, in terms of the way they run routes and the way they get open, there's some similarities there. And obviously the way that Metcalf and Claypool are big bodies, but I think can get open in a really strong degree as well, especially off the line of scrimmage. That's the thing that drove me crazy with DK coming out of college. Like, he was such a good receiver against press that people just sort of – I just don't think he got enough credit for that. And that's where I think Claypool's game is the strongest too, when someone mans up against as the ISO wide receiver on the outside. So – there's some similarities there where I might be willing to draft both those guys. But obviously, as you said, the quarterback situation's a problem. The reason I think that Claypool got phased out was because they completely phased the vertical game out. And there are ways to use a player like Claypool other than just in the vertical game, but maybe he wasn't there yet from a route running perspective. Maybe he will be there in his second season. There's a lot more questions than there were with a guy like DK Metcalf, where I thought it was just full green light, full go ahead. There are more stopping points with Claypool, but I think he and Johnson, and I'm a big Deontay Johnson fan. He's a big reception perception stud. But I'm a fan of both of these guys and their talent. I think they can both be really good players.
Yeah, because if Claypool, Vincent Jackson's kind of a nice, safe comparison. It feels like. We can't look at 1 year and say, guaranteed, Chase Claypool is no worse than Vincent Jackson. That's stupid. Vincent Jackson was a 1,000-yard receiver year after year, get high single-digit touchdowns year after year. Then he started to get hurt. But body type wise and speed for body type wise, these are both sub 4.5 guys at whatever they are, 6'4", 6'5", 225, 230 pounds. Huge individuals. Huge. Like we're bragging on Courtland Sutton. Chase Claypool's not giving up any size to Courtland Sutton, and he's faster.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think he's necessarily shown that stuff I was talking about, just that baller kind of like, I can't believe you got yourself in a position while you were double covered to somehow be falling down and catching it, right? That's a special...
Yeah, no.
I'm not sure Claypool's shown that, nor did Vincent Jackson ever. Vincent Jackson had a role in those mostly Charger offenses. I guess he had some Tampa Bay years, but he was better with the Chargers, where okay, you're running deep. Like, get your wind sprint shoes on because you're going to go deep a whole bunch, and that's probably Claypool's future too, especially if Deontay Johnson is the other guy. But so it can lead to some variability. But therefore somebody who had Vincent Jackson on a team all those years might object to the notion that he was an elite fantasy player because you always either got 180 yards and 2 touchdowns or 32 yards and no touchdowns. I guess that could be Claypool's future, but again, is it a level jump from a guy who had over 800 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns? That feels like we're stretching. But then when you remember what the ride was like game to game, and then also as the season went along, it kind of doesn't.
Yeah, I think Vincent Jackson makes for a really good floor comparison. If you really believe in Claypool becoming a good player, I think at worst he could be a Vincent Jackson type player, and I think DK Metcalf's a much, much, much better player than Vincent Jackson. So that's your high end hope. I'm never going to compare anybody to Calvin Johnson, so we're not going to talk about that one.
Getting into high-interest credit card debt is easy. Getting out can be really hard, and that's why Upstart sponsors from time to time to let you know that they know that you're more than just your credit score. Upstart offers smarter interest rates to help you pay off your debt. They go beyond the traditional FICO score when assessing your credit worthiness. They actually reward you based on your education and your job history in the form of a smarter interest rate, though you don't have to have a degree to use Upstart. You can check your rate with Upstart just a few minutes without affecting your credit score. And if you decide to apply for a loan and get approved, most people get their funds the next business day. Over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get a simple fixed monthly payment. With that, 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate up front for a loan. You can get approved, like I said, the same day and receive funds as fast as one business day. It can be a real relief to get this down to a fairer interest rate. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/Harris. That is upstart.com/Harris. Don't forget, use our URL. Let them know we sent you. That's upstart.com/Harris. Okay, we are back, and we are continuing to count down our level jumpers for 2021. And because we cannibalized from each other, we each only have our number 2s left. We both stole each of our number 3s was our other number 1s, because that's the kind of sync that we're in, Matt. We just know each other so well after doing the show for several years. So I need to ask you your number 2 level jumper. Your number 1 being Chase Claypool. Who's your number 2 level jumper for this coming season?
Well, the good news for all of your listeners is that all of these are going to be correct. So, you didn't even need to get 5 from each of us because all of these are going to be right. So it's just home run after home run, especially injury induced. All these guys will definitely not get hurt. My number 2, and now I guess my number 1 is AJ Dillon, the Packers running back.
Okay.
Look, folks. I'm a sucker for a big back. You can clip this and put it on Twitter. I'm a sucker for the big thighs, all right? It is what it is. I think that A.J. Dillon is, I objected to the draft pick, didn't like it, but it looks like he will probably be the number 1 back there because Aaron Jones, I think, has played his last snap with the Green Bay Packers. We'll see what happens to him in free agency. I liked the one game that we got out of Dillon, obviously, picture perfect in the snow, Lambeau, blah, 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 blah. I really think that offense it's not going to be the same offense, right? From an efficiency perspective, they were one of the 3 or 4 most efficient offenses of the last 10 years, that Green Bay Packers offense. But I think they're obviously still going to be a good offense. I think Dillon could add yet another dimension to that. I like the way he runs. I like the physicality that he runs with. And it's clear that they want to be, not this high-flying spread offense. They want to run through the ground game. I think Dillon's going to have a huge role, and I just think that we saw a little tiny glimpse of him as a rookie in this situation, and I really liked that glimpse. That could just be my bias. Obviously, everyone knows I'm a receiver guy, but right after wide receivers, the next thing to capture my heart is a big back with, I guess, those big, powerful lower bodies.
I have to admit, I'm not sure I have an opinion entirely about him. That was the Tennessee game, right? Week 16?
Correct. Yes.
And it was like he out Derrick Henry in the snow, and everybody said, "Oh my God, why isn't he Derrick Henry?" Right? And I'm not sure I have a fully developed. He isn't like if we're gonna have a foot race between Derrick Henry and AJ Dillon that goes for 100 yards, I'll take Derrick Henry. For 100 yards, I'll take Derrick Henry.
Different, yeah.
But like I don't know, inside the first 10 yards, I didn't think Dillon looked terribly slow. In the way that often I think Derrick Henry getting going often looks really slow, and it's why he has so many negative plays. But Derrick Henry's just a different kind of athlete who can keep taking the ball over and over and over again. Eventually, he just wears you out, and he's on a team that continues to want to give him, he's going to get, if that's his career, if he's 25 to 30 carries every game, the rules kind of just haven't applied to him, and I keep taking it on the chin because I keep thinking that isn't the NFL anymore. Probably that isn't the projection for Dillon because this dude named Aaron Rodgers is playing. But there's, of course, Aaron Jones has made 2 seasons worth of fantasy bones out of short touchdowns, and those could be sitting right there for A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry's my guy. That's for a while now. Again, for one of the big backs I've fallen in love with here. But he is different where it's like, I don't think Derrick is the most explosive player, like you said, when he first gets the ball. It's that long speed combined with the size and the physical mentality that he brings to the open field. But Derrick Henry and A.J. Dillon, like there were a lot of comparisons between A.J. Dillon and Derrick Henry during the lead up to his draft process. And, it's because of the size and the speed combination. But for me, I agree with your assessment where I think nobody has the long speed at that size that Derrick Henry does. He's just an alien that got dropped off on planet Earth, and then instead of taking over the human race, he just decided to do it on the football field. So thanks, appreciate that, Derrick. Thanks for not overthrowing us with your alien species. But it's that long speed for Derrick Henry, whereas I think Dillon might be more powerful and explosive in the short range. Because again, let's talk about body type one more time. It's like for Derrick, he's like a big top heavy guy, whereas Dillon's got that big lower half, the tree trunks, and I think that's where the explosiveness and the power comes in the early portions of it, and that's going to matter a lot for a guy that, like you said, is probably going to push 16, 17 carries a week as opposed to Derrick Henry at like 25, pushing 30 sometimes.
Yeah. The Eddie Lacy comparison is just too juicy to not make. It really, like, young Eddie Lacy was terrific, man. Young Eddie Lacy was a very, very good player. I think if A.J. Dillon could ever be the Eddie Lacy of those first, 2 seasons or so before Lacy started to eat himself out of the league, that would be a really great result for anybody who's backing A.J. Dillon. That's almost averaging 100 yards a game and almost a touchdown a game. That's something along those lines. And like Lacy never probably combined tested the way, Dillon flew up draft boards because he ran a fast 40 time. But before he got fat, he was actually a really good player. I mean, he benefited from, again, some really great Aaron Rodgers offenses in the early teens, but so was Dillon.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he's going to have that same advantage.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about him, to be honest. And there's just not a lot of film to get to on him. So a lot of judging. I mean, the thing is, if Aaron Jones isn't in Green Bay, it's almost automatically a level jump. So he's almost automatically right for the role no matter what. If they're not accidentally signing Chris Carson, right? Oops, now he has to deal with Chris Carson or whoever. Then A.J. Dillon's going to level jump, and the question is just where do we take him? And that's going to be hard. That's going to be
That'll be tough, yeah.
It's going to be because there just isn't a lot to go on, but the situation is ripe. I'm excited that I have my number 2 still to talk about because I can get your opinion on him. So on the show, as the season wears on, as people are kind of falling out of their fantasy leagues, and I'm trying to keep them engaged, try to throw a bone to the people who are kind of looking at the long term, I do something I call film futures or whatever it's called, where I basically dig back into the full season of a player to that point, whether it's week 11 or week 13 or whatever, and just say, okay, I've been watching it piecemeal as the weeks have gone along, but I haven't, just watched it all at once. So I'll pick a player and watch it all at once. And it's kind of become something of an inside joke in the show, and certainly among people who send me emails and tweets and stuff, that often the players who I pick who are not superstars, who are either injured or who just haven't really popped yet, often I come away saying, I'm not that excited, guys. Michael Pittman was one of them. Like T. Higgins was one of them. I would have loved to have fallen in love, and they're fine, but I'm not seeing the thing that makes me go wow. And people are like, "We'll pick people who you can get me excited about." And my response to that is always, "Well, if I knew who I was going to get excited about beforehand, I would just pick the right." Yeah, I would. I don't know until I watch them. So this year was kind of rare. I didn't do as many film futures because of the weird. There were games on weird days, and just there was left empty space to fill on the show. But someone who I came away liking more after I watched his film is Brandon Aiyuk. So
I knew you were going to pick Brandon Aiyuk.
Oh, there you go. So
I just had a feeling.
Number 2 on my list. Number 1 being Courtland Sutton, but and it's not an easy level jump for him either for a few different reasons. He didn't have Deebo Samuel healthy for some of the year, so he got to kind of be a de facto number 1. He himself was out some of the time. It was a mess at quarterback in the second half of the season. He still winds up with almost 800 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns. So a level jump there gets you to 1,210. It would have to be a pretty significant jump. And I came away, and people, if I want you to talk, I've been talking too much, but I came away, if people want to hear my full opinions, there's a 12 or 15 minute speech on a show from December. Just go back to the archives of the podcast. There's a Brandon Aiyuk film future. So I'm interested in your take on what you thought of. You might not have run him through the reception perception engine yet, but maybe you have. And even if you haven't, you certainly have thoughts.
Correct. Have not yet. So he's one of the guys. My plan basically this year is to hit like all of the incoming free agents, which is a lot of guys, by the way, and a lot of important guys, and then like also sprinkle in some 2020 rookies. So I've gotten to like Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, then I'm going to start coming up on the Aiyuk and Claypool type of guys here pretty soon. So get excited for that, folks. And then with Aiyuk, though, sort of similar to what we talked about with Michael Pittman, but to a much greater degree, that I knew that Brandon Aiyuk was going to come in and be like a cool after-catch player, right? And immediately when he comes in and gets drafted by Kyle Shanahan, I was like, all right,
Mr. After-catch, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to get him some opportunities after catch, right? Like I can project that pretty confidently. However, I had questions about Aiyuk being the type of guy that when you line him up against press coverage, what's he going to be able to do? Because you don't see a lot of reps of that on his college film. He's just a one-year guy. However, one thing that I thought was really impressive about him, and it was basically like, this is impressive in college, but will he be able to do it in the NFL? That's a question worth asking because, just the different level of competition, whatever. I thought Aiyuk was so good in the downfield game in college, and again, didn't really get a lot of credit to this. People give him like Golden Tate comparisons and stuff. Like Golden Tate never set up defensive backs on vertical routes, did a lot of the deception, fooled guys with his eyes, with his head fakes and everything on vertical corner routes, post routes, 9 routes, like Aiyuk did in college. And I thought he really transitioned that well to the NFL. There was one game in particular, and I can't remember what game it is, but it was one of the later ones. It might have been the Buffalo one later in the year, where they're getting smacked around by the Bills or whatever. But Aiyuk had one long touchdown in that game, where he successfully did that type of deception on his downfield route running and was able to score a touchdown. I was like, that is so – I remember watching it live and being like, that is so emblematic of the type of stuff I didn't think he got enough credit for as a prospect. After his rookie season and what we've seen from Deebo, I like Deebo too. I would take Aiyuk over Deebo Samuel as a fantasy commodity, as a wide receiver. I would take Aiyuk 10 times out of 10 over Samuel. And I like Samuel as a player, but no way does Samuel get open like Aiyuk does. I think he is a player that I was really tempted to put on this list, but thought it was like, it's like you said, it's got to be a big level jump.
Right.
Like the end of season numbers don't look all that special for him. 748 yards, 5 touchdowns, 60 catches. But you also have to remember, like you said, he had injury problems in training camp. He was on the COVID list twice last year, and obviously playing in like not the best offenses. But when he was cooking at the end of the year from like a volume sense, they were using him like a true number 1 receiver. And man, I think he can be that type of guy going forward. I'm really excited about this player. And if he does pop in reception perception, I'm going to go crazy about him. So we'll see.
Okay, good. I mean, that's what I wanted to hear because I think people know where I stand. He did have like a over-the-shoulder long catch against the Bills in Week 13. He had like a two guys in week 10 against the Saints, two guys hanging all over him. He still had the body control to make the play. I think he's better than Debo too. I came out of that film futures thinking, yep, I'm going to have Aiyuk ahead of Debo, even though Debo still is going to have probably 5 touches a game as a floor, and a lot of them in open space where he gets to just run over people like a running back. He's valuable too. Yeah. And I came in thinking, well, Aiyuk's another Debo, and I think he has some of that, but he's not quite the crusher that Debo is in the running game or in the whatever you want to call it, the very quick screen game or the jet sweep game or whatever you want to call it. He's not quite Debo in that regard, but I do think he's already, even after 1 year, showed more as a receiver. So there you go. Those are our lists of the 5 level jumping players for 2021. A couple of guys in common.
Chris, can I say this though, real quick? Since we overlapped so much, I will say, when I was waffling between Courtland Sutton, like, is this too obvious of a level jump or whatever? I was pretty tempted to put Marquise Brown back on my list.
Marquise Brown was your number one.
It was my number one last year, and I think I'm standing by Marquise Brown based on what we saw to end like the second half of the season in the playoffs, everything. I think that the player that I believed in last year is still in there. Obviously questions there, but he's still a guy that I would encourage. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be cheaper than ever. We know that. Like, we'll also see if the Ravens make moves, because they just might say, all right, our passing game just needs to look differently, right? It's hard to say that he's the only game in town again.
Yeah.
So that could change the equation, but I don't agree. I don't find that to be like a crazy scenario. I mean, it's kind of the reason I'm giving Carson Wentz a chance to be really good again, because when there's no way for numbers or really even film to account for what happens when everything that revolves around your job on the football field has completely fallen apart. In the case of Wentz, it was, I have no healthy receivers and no healthy offensive linemen. It's really hard to say, you suck. Like, I just don't think you can even really judge anything that happened. You can judge some. He made some dumb throws, but like not to the extent that people are saying he's awful. And I think to a lesser extent that applies to Marquise Brown. It's a non-functioning pass game. What are you supposed to do? Like, I don't know how he's supposed to somehow impose his will and get 5 or 6 more targets a game. I just don't. Maybe there's a way that can happen going forward.
Well, I think too, if they add another receiver, I actually think that probably can be a good thing, right? Like, for example, look at what happened with Buffalo last year. Everyone thought that was a non-functioning passing attack. And obviously Josh Allen took a ton of individual leaps and deserves a ton of credit. But, they put a really, really good player like Stephon Diggs. I mean, I think Stephon Diggs is one of the best receivers in football. I don't, the Bills could add, they could add a lot of, the Ravens could add some good receivers this year because of what's in free agency. Like, I think Chris Godwin would be such a perfect fit for what they do because he's such a badass blocker, and like they need more presence over the middle of the field because that's where Lamar thrives. But like, if they add another receiver and it just adds to the efficiency and raises the ceiling of that offense, it can still, and they throw more because their passing game is better. Even if their quarterback has some questions as a passer, that can raise the ceiling for everybody involved, Brown included, who they kind of tried to pigeonhole into that number one receiver role. Like, let's use him on the outside and only use him deep. Like, once they started to give him some more layups, especially in the end of this regular season and then in the postseason, I think he really started to put things together from a statistical perspective.
Yeah, Lamar needs to get better. The real upshot is Lamar needs a Josh Allen-esque. It's not impossible. Josh Allen just showed it's possible. Like, that's what Lamar needs to be better. But you're right. A better passing game around him can bring out what Marquise Brown does well. All right. So once again, we are encouraging you. I am once again encouraging you to find Matt on Twitter, @Harmon_BYB, because there's a forthcoming announcement about how Reception Perception will be available to you. So please follow him. I love doing this show with you every year, my friend. Thanks again very much for doing it.
Hey, my pleasure. This is one of the more fun parts of the offseason, is trying to decide who's going to take these jumps, and it's cool to jump right into, no pun intended, jump right into it right away with you, man.
And thank you so much for listening to us talk about this silly stuff. Let me also thank today's sponsors, because they're 3 really good ones, and if you can find your way to supporting them, I would love it. It would help the show keep going. We had Brooklinen, we had First Leaf, and we had Upstart. So 3 pretty different businesses there, all of whom have been sponsors for multiple years. And if you don't have the means, please don't worry about it. But if you do and you're so motivated, use our promo codes, use our URLs. You can find them at harrisfootball.com, and it really does help keep the show going. That's going to do it for this week, but I am in once a week mode, and we really truly are starting to look ahead to 2021. Beginning next week, we are going to start talking about free agency. We're going to talk about the running backs who look like they'll be free agents coming up here pretty soon, and we talked about Aaron Jones already a little bit. He's a big name on the list. I mentioned Chris Carson. He's a big name on the list. We got a whole bunch of other ones. I'm honestly not sure who the guest's going to be, but I'll find someone you enjoy listening to, and we will start previewing the transactions that are going to consume the NFL world over the course of the next couple of months. Until then, again, thank you so much for listening. Your support means a ton. Your hat is awesome. I will talk to you next week.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The closing theme is Say Yes by The Wellspring. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.